Sure.
Take it away, Ash.
So I'm just going to share my screen, make sure I get the right browser. Hopefully everyone can see the browser. Cool. So I'm going to do a deep dive on a feature that was shipped 16.6, and it sort of goes by a few names. This is the official feature post in the release notes here. Minimal forking, only include the default branch. And there's a very tiny little screenshot there that doesn't really help if you zoom in, but essentially when you clone a project, prior to this change, you would fork. When you would fork this project, you would only have the option to fork everything, including potentially a lot of branches, and that could be time consuming and not what you wish to do. So this feature gives the toggle of all branches or the default branch, and that again, it's a bit small, but here's just an example of how it was designed to look. This here main, I'll click on that again. That'll be main if the default branch is main, or master, or whatever the default branch is. It's contextual to the project. It's an interesting one here. This was created, the feature request was created 5 years ago. And so we finally got it out, and there was quite a few thumbs up on this one. I think there's 18, but there was another one that had, I think, over 200. So it was a pretty requested feature, and it was nice to get it out. So it started life as this issue here, and it was great. James, a former employee, team member, he created some example code and commands, and ultimately it fell into two different changes. Just getting the toolbar out of the way, sorry. One in GitLab, that was required before we could make progress on the back end and front end, and then a follow-up merge request that included both back end and front end changes. So here's a better screenshot. This is the before. There's no section here about branches to include, and yeah, this is an example for on the GDK, so users master. I'm pretty sure, I think the default is to all branches, which was the previous behavior effectively, despite there not being a radio. But yeah, so that's the feature from a high level. Seemingly pretty simple feature, but it was a little bit of back and forth in GitLab to figure out the best way to do this. So I think the feature landed in 16.6, but the GitLab changes were merged in 16.4. So I'll jump into those. Any questions so far? Cool. So I hadn't really contributed.
Sorry, I will ask questions. Yeah. So the first one is, what happens with LFS is one question, and the second question is, like if you only fork from the default branch, and you want to, for example, cherry pick something on another branch, is that possible? Or if you want to somehow pull in a branch that's on the upstream.
The latter, you would need to do that manually. But the question of like bringing in a branch that exists upstream, I suppose, the upstream project. And the same is probably the same answer. The reference wouldn't be there. So I'll just jump quickly into where there's a bunch of changes, and I'll sort of dive into them a little more.
Yeah, so, sorry, deeply. we can come back to those questions. No problem.
No, that's okay. I think that just to answer at its kind of and drill into the most important part of this change, which was really in this create fork Go file. This is essentially deep down at the very sort of end of GitLab, it essentially runs git commands. And so here, this is the previous, I guess, flags that are passed to git clone. So bare and quiet with the sort of defaults. So I was simply attaching some additional flags here. So -- no tags and -- single branch. So to answer your question, I believe that will just be, yeah, it's just going to contain the default branch. So there'll be no concept of other branches, other references, or anything like that. So you'd need to manage that manually.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
But I see that the code is probably generic, right? That it accepts any revision, yeah, or was it different? Yeah, it says it's like request get revision, and yeah, so it can accept any branch, yeah, so you can create a fork from any branch, yeah, if I'm not mistaken.
Very astute, very well spotted. Yes, so the single branch, I believe you can. No, I'll retract that. When you specify single branch, you need to follow it up with a branch, and then so at the core of the GitLab change, it, like you say, you can pass in any branch to via the gRPC call, and it's extracted out here, this get revision branch. So, and that was a bit of the challenge with the back and forth, because I think originally I had this as pretty much hard coded, but the GitLab team requested that we make this flexible to accept, something provided by the caller, so on the Rails side we send through like master or main, and yes, it's supported here. So yeah, but essentially at its sort of fundamentals, it's just git clone with a bunch of specific arguments that are triggered if the branch is provided. And so when you fork a project, it passes a nil branch with the options there. So yeah, this is probably the most interesting part. I've been talking a little bit too much, so this is probably the most interesting file change right here, is that it really just depends. We set the default flags much higher up and then append to that flags list, whereas previously it was kind of part of, I guess, the constructor for this git command. It passed in flags here, so we define it up higher here, and then depending if this is inspecting the output of a gRPC object, and if that's been passed in, we start to pick it apart. So this the gRPC makes it a little more challenging, but it wasn't a huge change. I think if you look at the top here, it says there's some changes are not shown. That's the generated gRPC stuff. So I'll just close the tests. This is a bug fix, actually, that just happened to be requested. There was an existing bug with parsing the branch. It had to, there was a situation there, so probably ignore that one. I think it's in a separate commit. But the create fork goes the main change. So the request, try to get the method function signature here. It's passed in. Here we go. So yeah, rec is passed in. It's a create fork request to this create fork function, and there's a get revision method. And if you think, I'll just search for this through the code, you'll probably find that it doesn't appear.
It's probably, yeah, somewhere here, auto-generated, yeah.
Yeah, so with gRPC, it's just another transport from communication, and it uses, instead of JSON, in this case, it uses protocol buffers, which is a binary data format. So it's not, once it's being transferred, you can't really inspect it. And so when you make a change to the code, the protocol buffer definition needs to change. And by doing that, it sort of auto generates various things, and it's a bit of magic, but the reason it does it like this is so that you can have protocol buffers generated for form in different languages, and still have compatibility between languages. But this is the request here. So get revision returns an array of bytes, and that is what's passed through from Rails in the next merge request. But this is probably the next most interesting addition, so this is the create fork request. If I just expand this, this is the create fork request struct. So when Rails makes the gRPC call to Gitly to say, I'd like to fork this repository, it passes in repository and some other things, and I added a revision attribute here, which is an array of bytes, and you need to specify the order just so it maintains compatibility. Yeah, I kind of just followed the flow, I suppose, of the previous implementation, but it's probably not much more interesting. You can see it generates a lot of stuff here that's not my code. That's just how protocol buffers work. There's a make command to run that you need to do. You need to run before you commit your code. Otherwise, it'll say there's changes made to the protocol buffers definition and they haven't been generated. But unfortunately, it's a lot of this, and so I'll collapse this for now just so we can inspect the rest.
Patrick, you had a question. You had your hand up earlier.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Patrick.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay, but I think the question answered itself. I was gonna ask, and you also answered the question. Like, so in the previous behavior, we just send the two argument quiet, and I forgot the other one. No,
And
bear.
bear, yep.
And in this
Yes.
new one, we just happened no tags and single branch. So bear and quiet are still there.
Yes.
And yeah, and we happen those three argument behind it basically. And
Correct. Yes. So yeah, there's 3 additional arguments passed to the git clone command if the branch has been passed through as a request. So if you say fork default branch only, then that branch is passed in master or main, and then that's what the value will be here. But if it's not, then this block of code isn't executed and runs exactly the same as previously with bear and quiet. So you can run these commands, just experiment locally running git clone and add -- bear, and you'll see what that does. It creates a clone of a project that is not actually usable, as in there's no code locally. It's just essentially a copy of the git, all the git files. Yeah, it's quite interesting, and so you could experiment with these. You can run these on any git clone and see the same output.
So could a possible future enhancement on this be to provide the branch that you're interested in? Because if environments where they have a big development branch, for example, that might be all they're interested in.
Absolutely, yes. I think it's mentioned in the it's mentioned in the 5-year. There's quite a few requests in here. I think it expanded out to tags, and I think that happened to be just an easy one. But yeah, I think it was requested to select select a branch.
Yep.
It's important to note that you can do this locally. You can clone a git clone, do what run the command locally, and then push up and create a new project into your namespace or whichever namespace, and kind of effectively do a fork, but with all the different parameters that you want. But yeah, it's not as nice as using the UI. It's much easier. So,
or for example, you can change the default branch to the one you're interested in, and then create a minimal fork, and then change the default branch to the other one. But yeah, it's just a crazy.
Said by someone with maintainer privileges, owner privileges.
That's true. Yeah, gotta watch out for that one. Yeah, sorry. The main change to the protocol buffer definition is in this. Everything lives under proto, and then you have a proto file for every kind of object. And so when you add a new field like I did here, you need to give it a number, and then this file up here, the proto go Gitly PB, that's the generated code that actually is created for you when you run the make command to generate that. So this is all the only change in the comment I made, and then it created all of this juicy goodness without that it's having trouble expanding. Yeah, and we call that up here, and so this is really just the main sort of interesting function here. So with that in mind, and moving on, the next part was the Rails side. So there's both back end and front end. Quite a few changes, despite it, again, seeming like a really small feature. But I'll collapse the front end stuff because I'm a bit of a JavaScript and view noob. But there are quite a lot of front end changes that pertain to passing things around, and this is the main change here, using the pajamas framework, GL form groups. And here we should be able to see what the default value is. I couldn't remember before. Might be up here. This is actually a bug fix too, I noticed. If you click create fork and something happens, it perennially stays in this is saving state. There's a spinner and it never goes away. So that was actually a little fix that happened to make it through. But I'll collapse these. So change to the project model. That was just tidying it up, but nothing really exciting for that one. I think, there's quite a few commits are broken down into very sort of discrete changes, but fork service, I'll collapse these front end actual. So the fork service is, like many services we have, is called either from a model or a state change. And we do some validation here to make sure that, because you can call this via the API, this is, there's some changes further below that means this functionality is actually exposed via the API. It's not just via the JavaScript. So that's why this merge request is a bit bigger than maybe it seems at first. But we added a new import data attribute to the params, the fork params, and we include the fork branch, and that can be either nil or provided from the front end. There was quite a few changes spread across. I was quite surprised, to be honest. But the next change, the fork worker, just setting up some variables that were passed through. So the service passes this big blob of hash data, and ultimately that's passed over to the worker, and the fork worker, picks it apart here and does some checking to make sure that there's some data there. And this is probably the next most interesting change. This is where we get to the edge of, of Ruby, and we start to head out into Giddly land. We call this is an existing call to the fork repository method, which this is going to be a gRPC call. And eventually, we previously just had source repo, now we pass in the branch. That could be nil or master or main. We updated the API so you can pass in branches, which is an interesting, that it's not branches. Probably interesting for another time. I'll just collapse these specs. API change to support this, because the actual change comes via an API call from the front end. So
Patrick's got a question.
I keep missing. Sorry, Patrick.
It's okay. But it's actually just a small question. Why isn't it like a name argument here?
As in,
Yeah, branch. I don't know.
It's a positional argument.
Yeah, it's,
Positional parameter.
yeah.
Good question. There is nothing stopping it. It probably should have been, because as we can see down here, it has a default value. So that would have been a lot more intuitive and instructive for reading the code. But it's a good suggestion. I should have done that. Feel free to update if you wish, because there could be additional arguments in the future. So good observation.
Maybe it was
so this is
like an RPC reason or like API reason, but okay.
No, because this is the corresponding change down here, so it's really still in Ruby land. And yeah, that could have easily been branch :nil and supported that. So yeah, that's I think I'd probably go with the old school Ruby, Ruby 1 style. But yeah, that's a good observation. We could have done that.
Okay.
And that's the main change. The next main change here, we pick apart the branch, and interestingly, we transpose it into an actual reference. So that was going back to the GitLab change. There was some conjecture: do we pass in like just a sort of human readable branch name like master main, or do we pass in the more technical, sort of accurate like reference, which is what the GitLab team requested. So that's the expectation, that when we make the GitLab RPC call, which is right here, that is passed in that format here. So we do some conversion there. That probably could have been extracted out into another method, although it's not called again, but it's probably maybe a little terse.
Because that's almost what you would pass to the Git binary, right? Like in that format.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you did the git clone on the command line, I believe you can get away with, I could be wrong, but I think you can get away with just saying master or main. But I think there was Patrick from the GitLab team had some good rationale why we should be very explicit about this. I think it was to do with some validation. But these are just specs, and that's the gist of it. It did take me quite a while to get my head around all the different places where the data is passed around, but it's it wasn't that, apart from the API changes, the documentation, the specs, it's not a huge change in the back end and front end either. But I've been talking a lot. Thanks for listening. Any questions before I wrap it up?
Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, just a quick note. You mentioned regarding refs heads that it could be like extracted. I remember we actually have some utility classes that actually like have this constant, for example, refs head, or for example, a repository .rb file model. It actually contains a method which is called expand ref, and it's either adds refs heads to the branch if it's a branch, or refs tags to the ref if it's a tag, something like this. So yeah, it's I agree that it's not critical at all, just regarding the extraction that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I think that was part of the the tag, protecting against passing in like a tag here, like V something or other. And yeah, it would be preferable to lean on some pre-established existing logic that handles that. So I might actually do that and make your suggestion, Patrick, with the positional argument at the same time, just to make it nice. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Ash. Actually, it was really interesting, and it was great to see one of these ones that goes all the way through front end, back end, and GitLab all in the same flow. And it it helps. It certainly helped me connect those dots. So thanks, and yeah, really great demo. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Thanks.
I'll stop the recording.